thank you all for coming to celebrate with us the final gotcha day for Faith Dean. As you know, it's been a long time coming, and it's a tremendous day for us and for all of you who have been hoping and praying and encouraging us. And so, I might not be one for speeches, but this day demanded a speech. So I wrote one before I came, and I wanted to give it in front of everyone. And I'm going to read it, because that's the way I'm going to do it today. Today we celebrate the adoption of Eliana Faith Dean. This has been a day that has been long anticipated and hoped for, and dreamt of and believed in. Eliana's story is a God story. It's also my story and Jen's, and it's also Crystal's story, Eliana's birth mother. But it is a story that begins and ends with God, and ultimately displays His goodness and strength. It's a beautiful story, mythic in proportion, and one that moves my soul deeply. This is because it is a story about redemption, and a story about faith, hope, and love, a story about mercy and justice, a story about sacrifice and selfless giving, a story about receiving a great promise and patiently enduring until that promise was fulfilled, and a story about adoption, inheritance, and a father who is a father to the fatherless. And it is God's story because it's a picture of God's redeeming love for us and what He has done to rescue each of us. And like all great stories, this one began with a crisis, with hopelessness, loss, and pain. For Jen and I, finding out that we couldn't have our own children was a painful and crushing experience. And for Crystal, a single mother of two, finding out that she was pregnant with no way to provide for a third was a crisis of despair. And for Eliana, it meant an uncertain future with no father or provision. In this place of despair, God Himself came into our situation and changed everything forever. He came to each of us where we were to comfort us and give us a precious and magnificent promise. To Jen and I, He gave us the promise of a child with a name, Eliana Faith, which means God has answered faith. To Crystal, He gave a promise of redemption, provision, and a way when there seemed like there wasn't a way. And to Eliana, He gave the promise that He's a father to the fatherless and would adopt her. And there's been much waiting since that time. Each of us has had to patiently endure all that stood opposed to us receiving what was promised. And over the last 5 to 6 years, Jen and I have had our moments where we wanted to give up hope and let go of this promise. And these moments were incredibly tough and tested our faith in His faithfulness. We first got connected to Crystal in early 2011 through a divine set of events. Crystal, in her great need, talked to her friend's mother, Sharon, who lives in Maine. Sharon had been through a crisis pregnancy when she was young and counseled Crystal to consider adoption. Sharon had given up a daughter to open adoption that now lived in California. This daughter's adopted mom walked into the school where Jen taught and explained the situation to Chrissy, the school secretary, aka Superwoman. And Chrissy said, "Oh my, you need to meet the deans. They would be perfect." And one thing led to another, and on Memorial Day 2011, Jen and I made an unforgettable trip to Bakersfield to meet Crystal for the first time. And we quickly fell in love with each other, even though we were all super nervous and awkward at first. Crystal herself had grown up in the foster system and had no family to support her. And it was at that time that we realized that God had set us all up. We share with Crystal the name Eliana Faith, which God had given to us 5 years previous. And this was right after we found out that she was going to have a girl. Crystal immediately received this name as a sign and began to believe that she was carrying the promise that God had given us. And
it means God has answered faith.
It means God has answered faith. And this began a redemptive process for Crystal, and seeing God take her painful circumstance and turn it around for good and for God's glory. And now she even uses her story as a testimony to help other girls who are dealing with crisis pregnancies. For Crystal, giving Eliana to us for adoption was the most loving thing she could have done. And it was also the most selfless and sacrificial thing she could do. And in giving up Eliana, I caught a glimpse of what it was like for God to give us His Son. Eliana is now legally adopted and has all the benefits of a naturally born child. Our love for her and the price we paid to adopt her came out of our own love. She never had to earn our love, and we freely gave it. And now she is an heir to all I possess and all that my parents give me. And this too has given me a glimpse of God's own fatherly love that I can see better now, how He chose us before the creation of the world and has given us an inheritance in Jesus. And I believe more in my own adoption now than ever. And lastly, I just want to say that my heart is filled to the brim and overflowing with thanksgiving. And I declare today that God is a good father to the fatherless and a strong father, and my soul magnifies the Lord. So...
Try to not cry.
Just cry, it's cool.
Today really is such a culmination of years of hoping and praying, and quite a few of you have been along with us, Joy and Jessica and Stephanie, and so many of you on this journey. And there's been painful times where I get a call, at the school, saying, "You'll never have kids," and then they look at Brian and say, "You'll never have kids," and we're like, okay, no hope for us. But in that moment, God came and spoke to us too and gave us hope, and throughout it, God's been so faithful. And thank you for all of you for being here. All of you are a piece of our story and a piece of her, she just has such a beautiful story, and you're all part of it. And, from Amber, we used to, at nights, we would watch her and Bella, and we would all be laying down, starting to go to sleep, because Jamie worked nights, and I would hear her whispering, and I'm like, what are you doing? Go to bed. Go to bed. It's like 9:30, go to bed, And she's like, oh, I was just praying for Eliana. I'm sorry. And I'm like, it would be every night. She's faithful to pray for this little girl, literally for a year and a half. And Hannah Lynn's been praying for Eliana since she was 2, and so many of you had stood in the gap too. And there's times when I was like, it's been 4 years, I'm done. I want to give up, I want to throw in the towel. Never believed that God has a family for us. And Joy, the times where she said no, I'm not letting go. My sister, she sent a stroller and put it on my doorstep a couple of years before Eliana, and in a moment where I was just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And she came. She's just been a constant, just imparted hope to me, and believing that this can happen. And for any of you that are struggling with, when is this ever going to happen for me? When are things ever going to work out, Just that there's hope. There's hope that God has a bigger story that we do not even get. I mean, when you sit back and look at Eliana's story, it's totally God. It just doesn't make sense aside from God. And so He's got a plan. He's got a bigger, story happening behind the scenes. So hold on to hope. We waited over 5 years for her, and God has answered faith. Don't give up. So thank you again for all of you who've stood by me, been the friend that I needed, and so many times, whether it be before, while we're waiting, or now as I'm trying to figure out how to be alone. I thought I would be really good at it, but I'm just figuring it out. So thank you for being here, being with us on this journey. So thank you. I don't even know where she's at right now.